What if I told you the most nutritious, flavorful foods on this continent have been systematically erased from your plate? We're told apples and corn are the gold standard, but the people who walked this land for 10,000 years had something better. We're talking about fruits sweeter than refined sugar, vegetables stronger and more resilient than modern corn, and powerful medicines that we now treat as nothing more than common backyard weeds. The truth is, you haven't tasted 90% of what America actually offers. See, this isn't just about missing out on a new flavor at the grocery store. We didn't just lose these plants. We lost the health, the immunity, and the pure physical resilience they gave us for millennia. Every time one of these species is forgotten, a piece of our own survival blueprint vanishes. If we don't stop to remember them now, right now, they'll be gone forever, buried under layers of industrial concrete and monoculture. Before we reveal the unbelievable entry at number 1, a plant so powerful it defies everything you think you know about vegetables, I want you to take a second. Think about the generations of hands, the thousands of years of careful tending that kept these seeds alive, just so you could even hear this story today. If you value preserving the actual truth of our land and the heritage of the people who knew it best, hit that subscribe button. Don't let this history go extinct on your watch. We owe it to the soil to remember. Let's start at number 15, the bearberry. Now, imagine you're standing on the edge of the Arctic tundra. It's brutal out here. The wind cuts through you, the soil is rocky and unforgiving, and almost nothing survives. But look down. There's this tough little berry, bright red and defiant, clinging to the ground. That is the bearberry. It's named that for a reason. Bears absolutely gorge on these things before they go into hibernation. But for the native peoples of the north, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Inuit, this wasn't just bear food. It was survival fuel. Think of it like the ancient version of those high-tech energy gels marathon runners use today. But here's the thing. If you popped one in your mouth right now, you'd probably be disappointed. They aren't bursting with sugar. They're actually kind of mealy and bland. But flavor wasn't the point. Function was. When you're miles from home in freezing temperatures, you don't need candy. You need endurance. These berries were dried, ground up, and mixed into stews to keep bodies moving when the snows got deep. And the real magic wasn't even in the fruit, it was in the leaves. Native healers knew something that took modern science centuries to catch up on. The leaves are packed with a compound called arbutin. Long before we had pills in plastic bottles, bearberry tea was the go-to weapon against kidney and bladder infections. It was literally saving lives from internal infections in a world without antibiotics. It went even deeper than the body, though. These leaves were dried and smoked in a sacred mixture called kinnikinnick. It was shared during councils and rituals to bind people together. So, the bearberry wasn't just a snack, it was a pharmacy and a church rolled into one tiny red package. Coming in at number 14, we have the wild plum. Picture a thicket of small trees, glowing with red and yellow fruit. Each plum is small, maybe the size of a walnut, but when you bite into one, it explodes with this tangy electric juice. But the wild plum was more than just a summer treat. It was a piece of tactical military engineering. You see, some tribes didn't just find these trees, they planted them. They would cultivate dense, thorny thickets of wild plums around their villages. It created a living wall, a natural barrier that provided food for the families inside, and a thorny, impenetrable defense against anyone trying to get in. Imagine a fortress that feeds you. That is genius. And they mastered the art of preservation. The Plains tribes, like the Lakota, gathered these by the bushel. They didn't just eat them fresh. They dried them or boiled them down. And here is where the culinary brilliance comes in. They mixed these tart, dried plums with buffalo fat and meat to create a variation of pemmican. If you've never had pemmican, it's hard to describe, but think of it as the ultimate survival ration. The fat provided the long burn energy, the meat rebuilt the muscle, and the acid from the plums cut through the heaviness and added that critical vitamin C. It was balanced, shelf-stable, and delicious. It was the fuel that powered life on the Great Plains. Now at number 13, we're shifting gears. We have to talk about a vegetable that you have definitely seen and you have probably killed. This is wild goosefoot, also known as lamb's quarters. This is the lost spinach of America. If you have a garden, a driveway, or even a crack in your sidewalk, you have likely seen this plant. It has these diamond-shaped leaves with a dusty white coating on the underside. Today, we call it a weed. We spend millions of dollars every year spraying it with Roundup, tearing it out by the roots, and throwing it in the compost bin. And that is a tragedy, Because while we're busy poisoning this plant, we're driving to the supermarket to buy spinach that has traveled 2,000 miles in a diesel truck. Here is the irony. Wild goosefoot is exponentially better for you than that spinach. We're talking about a nutritional powerhouse that native foragers relied on for thousands of years. It is loaded with protein. It has more vitamin A and vastly more calcium than almost any leafy green you can buy in a store today. It's creamy, it's tender, and it tastes like a nuttier, richer version of spinach. It doesn't need irrigation, it doesn't need fertilizer, and it doesn't need pesticides. It just grows, offering us free, top-tier nutrition, and our response is to poison it. It really makes you wonder, when did we decide that a weed was just a plant we hadn't figured out how to sell yet? We traded a survival superfood for a perfectly manicured lawn, and our health is paying the price. At number 12, we find the buffalo berry, and this is where the story shifts, because up until now, we've talked a lot about survival, about just staying alive. But native food wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about joy. On the northern plains, the Mandan and Cree peoples did something with this tart little red berry that sounds impossible for the 1600s. They made ice cream. See, the buffalo berry contains a natural compound called saponin. Now, usually saponins are bitter, soapy chemicals you want to avoid, but in this berry, they act like nature's egg whites. When you whip these berries up with a little water and sweetener, they don't just mash, they foam. They expand into a light, frothy, pink cloud. They called it Indian ice cream. Imagine sitting by a fire 300 years before Coca-Cola or Dairy Queen existed, sharing a bowl of this airy, sweet, soda-like treat. It puts our modern obsession with corn syrup to shame. It was chemistry, culinary art, and pure happiness, all harvesting from a thorny bush on the prairie. Coming in at number 11 is the red mulberry. If you grew up climbing trees with purple-stained hands and a purple-stained face, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The red mulberry, and I mean the native red, not the invasive white ones we see today, was the iron fruit of the East Coast. There is a weird bit of history here. When early European settlers arrived, they looked at these trees and saw dollar signs. They thought they could launch a massive silk industry in the colonies because silkworms eat mulberry leaves. But the silkworms turned their noses up at the American red mulberry. They only liked the Asian variety. The silk industry collapsed, but the locals knew the real value wasn't in the leaves, it was in the fruit. These berries are deceptively powerful. A single cup packs about 60 calories, which is huge when you are moving on foot. They are loaded with iron and vitamin C. Hunters could dry these out and carry them in pouches for months. They were lightweight, high-energy fuel that didn't spoil. While the colonists were crying over failed silk, native hunters were using that same tree to fuel journeys that mapped the continent. Number 10 is the wild persimmon. Now, I have to give you a warning with this one. If you walk into the woods in September, see a beautiful orange persimmon, and take a bite, you will never trust nature again. An unripe wild persimmon is so astringent, it will suck every drop of moisture out of your mouth. It feels like your jaw has been glued shut with cotton. It is a mistake you only make once. But here is the lesson the tree teaches you: patience. You have to wait for the frost. You have to wait until the air turns cold and the fruit looks soft, almost wrinkled and ugly. That is when the magic happens. The cold breaks down those tannins, and suddenly that bitter fruit turns into the date of the East. It becomes practically liquid, sugar-rich, jammy, and tasting like honey and apricots. Native families in the southeast would harvest these by the thousands after the first frost, mashing them into loaves that could be stored all winter. It was a dense brick of energy that tasted like dessert, provided by a tree that demanded you respect its timeline, not yours. And at number 9, let's dig into the earth for the Jerusalem artichoke, also known as the sunchoke. This isn't an artichoke, and it has nothing to do with Jerusalem. It is actually a species of sunflower, but while the flower is pretty, the treasure is underground. Think of this as the survival tuber. While potatoes can be finicky and rot if the conditions aren't perfect, the sunchoke is a beast. You can plant it, ignore it, let the frost hit it, and even let the ground freeze solid. The tuber stays safe and crisp underground, just waiting for you. It's like an underground vault of calories. For native peoples, this was an insurance policy. When the deer were scarce and the granaries were empty in the dead of February, you could go out, chip away at the frozen earth, and pull out a crisp, nutty, sweet root vegetable. It has a texture like a water chestnut and a flavor closer to an artichoke heart. It is effortless abundance that we have swapped out for potatoes that need constant babying. Most people will scroll past this, content with their grocery store plastic and tasteless produce. But you're still here. You're the one who understands that food is sovereignty. That knowing what grows in your own soil is the ultimate freedom. If you've learned even one thing so far, hit that subscribe button. It's the only way we keep these stories and these plants from being buried for good. At number 8, we have the Saskatoon berry. You see blueberries in every health magazine, touted as the ultimate superfood. But on the Great Plains, the Saskatoon berry was quietly outperforming them in almost every metric. The Cree, Blackfoot, and Métis didn't just snack on these, they built their bodies with them. Here is the data that supermarkets don't tell you. Saskatoons have double the calcium of blueberries. Double. They are packed with iron and fiber. When you are living a nomadic life, moving across vast distances, you need bone density and muscle fuel. This berry was the biological battery of the plains. It wasn't just a fruit, it was a bone builder. It powered a civilization. Moving down to number 7, let's look at the ground. This is the ground plum, or buffalo plum. This one is a master of disguise. It looks like a plum, it's named like a plum, but biologically, it's actually a member of the pea family, and its superpower isn't just nutrition, it's hydration. Imagine being on the open prairie in July. The sun is hammering down, it's 100 degrees, and water is miles away. Then you spot these small, reddish-purple pods growing low in the grass, hidden in plain sight. You pop one in your mouth, and it's juicy, mild, and refreshing. It was a natural canteen. Native travelers and hunters knew exactly where these grew. It was the difference between heat exhaustion and making it back to camp. It was a lifeline woven into the grass. Now, number 6 is where the real engineering comes in, the camas bulb. This is a beautiful blue flower that covers the meadows of the Pacific Northwest. Beneath the soil lies a bulb that looks a bit like an onion, but you can't just pull it up and eat it. If you eat it raw, it's slimy, flavorless, and practically indigestible. So, indigenous chefs developed a process that rivals modern food science. They would dig massive pits, line them with hot rocks and wet vegetation, and bury the bulbs. They kept these earth ovens burning for 3 days. This wasn't just cooking, it was chemistry. The long, slow heat broke down the complex starches called inulin and converted them into simple sugars. When the bulbs came out 72 hours later, they were dark, soft, and sweet, tasting like baked figs or molasses. But there is a catch, a terrifying one. Growing right next to the blue camas is a nearly identical plant with a white flower called the death camas, and the name isn't a metaphor. It is highly toxic. If you harvest the wrong bulb when the flowers aren't blooming, it can be fatal. This wasn't casual foraging. This was high-stakes expertise passed down through generations. At number 5, we have the choke cherry. The name says it all. If you eat this raw, the astringency will dry your mouth out so fast you can barely swallow. But the real challenge is the seed. The pits of choke cherries contain compounds that turn into cyanide when digested. Yet tribes like the Lakota and Cheyenne didn't avoid them. They engineered a way around the poison. They would crush the entire fruit skin, pulp, and the stone pits into a mash. Then, they would shape them into cakes and dry them in the sun. The genius is in the sun drying. The heat and evaporation process neutralized the toxins in the pits, and because they crushed the seeds, the resulting flour was high in protein and healthy fats. They turned a poisonous stone into a high-performance food source. That is mastery. Number 4. The ground cherry. Let's cleanse the palate with something purely delightful. If you've ever seen a plant that looks like a little paper lantern hanging near the soil, that's it. Inside that papery husk is a golden orange berry. This is nature's pre-wrapped candy. When you unwrap that husk and pop the berry, it doesn't taste like a tomato or a cherry. It tastes like pineapple mixed with vanilla. It is sweet, tropical, and complex. For native children, this was the original candy, but it's also a nutritional heavyweight packed with vitamin A and antioxidants. It's a reminder that amidst the hard work of survival, the drying, the grinding, the roasting, there was also sweetness. There was fruit that tasted like sunshine, wrapped in its own little package, just waiting to be found. We are down to the final 3. These aren't just plants anymore, these are anomalies. These are the ones that defy the logic of what we think is possible in North America. Coming in at number 3, we head back to the frozen north, to the boreal shield, to meet the lingonberry, also known as the squashberry. Now, if you look at a map of where these grow, it's hostile territory. We are talking about places where winter isn't just a season, it's a survival test that lasts for half the year. In a world before electricity, before Freon, before the modern refrigerator, fresh fruit in February was a myth. It was impossible. Once the snow fell, your diet was dried meat, dried fish, and dried roots. That was it, except for this berry. Indigenous peoples of the North, the Cree, the Inuit, the Sami, across the ocean, cracked a chemical code that we didn't scientifically understand until centuries later. They realized that if you took these tart red berries and simply put them in a container of water, just plain water, and set them in a cool place, they wouldn't rot, they wouldn't mold, they wouldn't ferment, they would stay perfectly, miraculously fresh for an entire year. How? It wasn't magic, it was biochemistry. Lingonberries are naturally loaded with an incredibly high concentration of benzoic acid. This is the exact same preservative sodium benzoate that you see listed on the back of soda bottles and processed food labels today to keep them shelf stable. But this wasn't synthesized in a lab, it was synthesized by the soil. Think about the implications of that technology. Imagine being a traveler in the 1700s. It's the dead of winter, 20 below zero. You open a birch bark basket that has been sitting in a cache for 6 months, and you pull out a berry that pops in your mouth with fresh, acidic juice. That wasn't just a luxury. That was vitamin C. That was the cure for scurvy. That was life itself, preserved in a jar of water by a plant that engineered its own survival strategy. It was the ancient refrigerator, powered entirely by nature. And now, at number 2, we have the fruit that feels like a glitch in the matrix, the pawpaw. If you were walking through a forest in Ohio or Indiana or Missouri, and you looked up to see a tree draped with massive green kidney-shaped fruits weighing a pound each, you would assume you had teleported to the Amazon. This is America's tropical secret. The pawpaw has absolutely no business growing where it does. It belongs in the family of custard apples, related to the soursop and the cherimoya fruits that thrive in the tropics. Yet, somehow, millions of years ago, this lineage drifted north and decided to set up shop in the freezing Midwest. The flavor is shocking. It doesn't taste like an apple, it doesn't taste like a pear, it tastes like a custard made of banana, mango, and cantaloupe. The texture is creamy, like a ripe avocado or a pudding. You can literally eat it with a spoon. So, why isn't this in every grocery store in America? Why are we eating rock-hard red delicious apples instead of tropical custard? Because the pawpaw refuses to be commodified. It bruises if you look at it wrong. It ripens off the tree in about 2 days and then turns into mush. You can't ship it. You can't stack it in a bin at Walmart. It demands to be eaten fresh, right where it grows. But for the people who walked this land, it was a caloric gold mine, and it played a pivotal role in the history of the United States that most textbooks gloss over. We've all heard of George Washington. We know he loved his cherries, but his favorite dessert, chilled pawpaw, he had them planted at Mount Vernon. But even more critical is the story of Lewis and Clark. In 1806, on their return journey, they were running on fumes. Their supplies were gone, they were exhausted, and for a stretch of their journey through Missouri, they survived almost exclusively on pawpaws. Think about that. The expedition that mapped the American West was powered, in its final desperate leg, by a tropical fruit growing on the banks of the Missouri River. We built a nation on the back of this fruit, and then, because it didn't fit in a cardboard shipping crate, we let it fade into the background. And finally we have arrived, number 1, the unbelievable entry. If there is one plant on this entire list that has the potential to change the world again, it is the Apios americana, the groundnut. Forget everything you know about potatoes. We have been trained to think that the white potato is the ultimate survival starch, but the potato is actually a bit of a nutritional weakling. It's mostly water and simple carbs. The groundnut is something else entirely. First of all, it doesn't grow underground like a normal tuber. It grows on a vine. Beautiful, intricate vines that weave through the undergrowth. And when you pull up the roots, you find these strings of tubers, like beads on a necklace. But the unbelievable part is what's inside. The groundnut has 3 times the protein of a standard potato. Let me repeat that, 3 times. It belongs to the legume family, the same family as beans and peanuts. So, biologically, it is a hybrid. It cooks like a potato, it tastes like a nutty roasted sweet potato, but it feeds your muscles like a steak. It is, for all intents and purposes, vegetable meat. This plant is so nutrient-dense that it literally changed the course of history. When the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth, they were starving. They had no idea how to farm this soil. They were dying. And then, they found them. They found caches of groundnuts that had been gathered and stored by the indigenous tribes of the area. Those wild potatoes, as they called them, were the main reason the Plymouth colony survived that first brutal winter. This plant saved the colonizers. It saved the people who would go on to build the America we know today. And how did we repay this plant? We forgot its name. We paved over its habitat. We replaced it with the Irish potato, a crop so genetically weak that a single blight caused a famine that killed 1 million people. Meanwhile, the groundnut was growing quietly in the woods, resistant to disease, packed with protein, fixing nitrogen in the soil, and asking for nothing. It is a tragedy of epic proportions. In a world where we are terrified of food insecurity, where we are trying to figure out how to feed a growing population with less land, the answer has been under our feet for 10,000 years. This isn't just a vegetable. It's a solution waiting to be rediscovered. So, here is the reality. We are walking through the supermarket, staring at the same 5 fruits and vegetables, thinking that this is all there is. We are starving for nutrition while standing on top of a gold mine. We have traded flavor for shelf life. We have traded nutrition for convenience, and we have traded the wisdom of 10,000 years for a barcode. But the seeds are still out there. The bearberry is still clinging to the rocks in the north. The pawpaw is still ripening in the shade of the riverbanks. The groundnut is still weaving its vines through the forest floor, waiting for someone to notice it. These 15 plants aren't just history. They aren't just trivia for a YouTube video. They are our future. They are the genetic blueprint for a food system that actually heals us instead of just filling us up. Most people are just looking for the exit. They're happy with the illusion. But you're still here, and that means you carry a responsibility now. If you want to be part of the movement bringing these foods back to American soil, you know what to do. Subscribe to this channel, share this video with a gardener, a chef, a teacher, anyone who eats. Let's stop eating like strangers on our own land. There is so much more to uncover. I'll see you in the next deep dive.